I'm going all in. I'm all in. I'm going all in. I'm all in. I believe that one day I will see your kingdom come, and I want to hear you say, welcome home, my child, well done.
Good morning. Oh, thanks for coming this morning. We should have one of those signs, kind of pardon our dust, like they have with construction. So sorry about some of the inconveniences of the construction, but that's coming along very, very well. So thanks for your cooperation with that. But it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. Because we're going to talk about money and giving this morning. I'll give you a second for that to sink in. Now, I know there's some people who think, we talk about money all the time at church. And somebody might be saying, the last time I was here 3 years ago, you were talking about money. You're right, that was the last time. And you have amazing luck or misfortune, whichever one you want to view it as. The last time we talked about money and giving. But we have to talk about that because we're in a series on Sunday mornings entitled All In, based on Jesus' challenge to his first followers and then by extension to those of us who are following him now. And these are Jesus' words. Luke chapter 9, verse 33, he said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. That was unmistakably a call to be all in as a follower of Jesus, because if you denied yourself, that would be part of it. If you took up your cross to follow someone, that was everything you were and everything you had, and that was your entire life that you were committing to them. All in. Now, in the analogy from the last couple of weeks of playing poker, we've sort of used it this way. You're putting all your chips on the table. You're even going so far as they would do in the old days of the Wild West to bet the farm on it. You could sign over the deed to your house, your farm, your ranch, that you would put everything in, that you would go all in with someone, all in on a particular thing. And so this morning, we're going to talk about all your chips on the table, betting the farm, about our money and our possessions. Because we cannot talk seriously about being all in with Jesus and his church and his mission if we're holding something out. You can't be all in and hold something out at the same time. But you might say, hold up, money, especially my money and how much I have and what I do with it, that's a very personal and private thing. You know what? I think you are exactly correct. Only I think it's more personal and more private than you know. In fact, it is so personal and so private that Jesus said, wherever your money is, that's where your heart will be also. Wherever your money is, that's where your heart will be also. Matthew chapter 6, verse 21, he said it precisely like this, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And if you know where people's hearts are, if you want to know where people's hearts are, I think probably what you could do is just see what they would do for money. See what they would do for money. There was a survey where they asked people, what would you do kind of for $1 million? For $1 million. So a few years old, but I think some of the same things follow. So what would you do for $1 million? In this particular survey, 20% of the people said they would sell their soul to whoever gave them $1 million. Can you really sell your soul like that? I don't know. 20%. 33% said they would change religions for $1 million. Isn't that something? How many of you would change churches for $1 million? Don't raise your hands. We don't want to know. But if you would tithe on that $1 million, we might let you go in joy and peace. I don't know. We'll see. So 33% said that. That's crazy. 28% said they'd spend 5 years on a deserted island for $1 million. Would you do that? You're thinking to yourself, Alaskan island or Hawaiian island, right? Makes a difference, doesn't it? Which one of those? Yeah. 24% said they would put a tattoo on their forehead. Would you do that for $1 million? Tattoo could say idiot. I don't know. Whatever that would be. Who knows? 21% said they would lay in a box of scorpions. I said dead or alive. I'd do the dead ones for $1 million, not the alive ones. Let's see, 42% said they'd give up television for life. You'd probably be better off. 52% said they'd move to another country. Would you do that for $1 million? You're like, depend on which country. Couldn't afford it for $1 million. 56% would burn their country's flag. And then this one, 36% would have their pet euthanized, put to sleep. For $1 million, would you do that? I better not comment on that one at all. I better just let it go. They upped it to like $10 million, and it got crazy. People said they would give up years of their life, from 2 years to 10 years of their life for $10 million. People said that 16% said they'd leave their spouse for $10 million. 25% would abandon their families. 10% would withhold testimony and let a murderer go free for $10 million. How about this? 8% said they'd have a limb amputated. Would you do that? People are crazy, aren't they? 4% said they would murder a stranger. 2% said they'd put a child up for adoption for one of their kids up for $10 million. The old saying, money makes people do strange things. But here's what, you know kind of what some people would do with money. And if your money and if your heart are connected, then you see how really messed up our hearts can be. It's not just the money, it's your heart. And because Jesus understands the connection between our hearts and our money, he talks not only about our hearts, but he actually talks more about our money and our possessions and what we think about them and how we handle them. Out of 38 parables that Jesus tells in the Gospels, over half of them talk about money and possessions and the combination of the two. 1 out of every 10 verses in the Gospels deals directly with the subject of money. In the Bible as a whole, there are about 500 verses on prayer. There are about 500 verses on faith. Just over 2,300 verses on money and possession. So Jesus talks a lot about it. The Bible talks a lot about it. Here's, in fact, kind of the wider context of what he says. Matthew chapter 6, again, the verses leading up to one we read earlier. Jesus said, don't collect for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust will destroy and thieves could break in and steal, but collect for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves can't break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, this is kind of interesting. You wouldn't know this from reading it in English. The words there where he says, do not collect for yourselves treasures. The word collect and the word treasures are different forms of the same word. Collect and treasures in the Greek language, different forms of the same word. You'll know the Greek word. The Greek word is thesaurus. Thesaurus. You know that word? We use that a lot. It means a treasury of words, a thesaurus. And so Jesus literally said to them, don't treasure your treasures. Don't treasure your treasures. And why would he say that? I think because money, our treasure, is the chief competition to God in our lives. Money is the chief competition to God in our lives. I think of it this way sometimes. What if somebody someday looked at my financial records to see where my heart was, right? If that's true, your treasure is, your heart will be also. You could look at my financial records, kind of see where my heart was. So that they don't pay attention to all the things that I've memorized and the things I say to the right people and the right places. They're just going to look at my financial records and see what's important to me. So they're going to look at my checkbook or whatever and see what's important to me. So what if long after I'm dead, a long time from now, I hope, a long time after I'm dead, aliens come down from another planet and their archaeologists find my checkbook. And so they're going to study that to see what's important to our species. And they're going to use me as an example. So they're going to look at it and they're going to look through my checkbook and say, okay, here we have, he writes 2 checks every month to a place called the FBC, First Baptist Church, for the same amount. He writes 2 checks every month. That's good. And then they go, oh, but wait a minute, there's 2 deposits from First Baptist Church every month too, and they're larger than the other 2 checks. And they give a name for that. That's called the Chicago Way. It's what they label that, Chicago Way. So there's 2 checks to FBC, and they go, hey, but wait a minute. They're more than this check for something called a car payment. So something to a car payment. So he must value this FBC more than he values the Chevrolet. So that's an interesting thing. We'll do that. And they said, but not nearly as much as he must value this thing called mortgage company. Because he writes a gigantic check to mortgage company every month. So that's weird. And then they go, hey, wait a minute, what's this? This is a weird one. What is this Starbucks thing? That must be his God because he pays tribute to him almost every day. That must be his God. Jesus is not lying or misleading us here, is he? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So where's your treasure? When you find that out, you'll know where your heart is. Is your heart and is your treasure, is that all in with Jesus and all in with his body, his people, the church, and all in with his mission that he's given to us? Because you can't be all in if you're holding something out. You can't be all in if you're holding something holding something out. If you've got your Bibles, real quickly, 2 Corinthians chapter 9. 2 Corinthians chapter 9. This is a letter from the Apostle Paul to the church, the city of Corinth. The city of Corinth is a city in Greece across from Athens. And really a good analogy for it is you think of kind of our part of the country. So Athens and Corinth are a little bit like New York and Chicago. Kind of Corinth is kind of like a second city to Athens there in Greece. It was at a crossroads. There was a lot of commerce there at the time Paul's writing this. Economically, the city's doing pretty good. So things are pretty prosperous for that day. It's a pretty strong economy, and so the Apostle Paul is writing them. But the problem he's writing specifically about, there's been a recession in the area of Judea where Jerusalem is. So there's been an economic recession. People have been hit very, very hard there, and the expectation, this is kind of cool, the expectation is the other churches would help them out. And so he's writing the church in Corinth about this recession that's happening in Judea and in Jerusalem, and about the fact that the folks in Corinth have promised to help out. So this is pretty cool that the church in Corinth said they're going to take up an offering and they're going to help out. And Paul's writing them to encourage the church to follow through with this, because undoubtedly they said they were going to take up an offering, but they haven't quite done it yet. So here's how he encouraged them. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 2 and 3. Paul says, "For I know your eagerness to help, and I've been boasting about it to the Macedonians, telling them that since last year you and Achaia were ready to give, and your enthusiasm has stirred most of them to action. But now I'm sending the brothers." Now this sounds kind of funny to me, because I think he's sending the brothers, like he's sending, Vito and Tiny to help them find their wallets, okay? So I'm sending the brothers in order that our boasting about you in this matter should not prove hollow, but that you may be ready as I said that you would. Now, he's really not, I'm kind of sure, he's not really fussing at them or threatening them. The brothers are an apostle or disciple named Titus and some other ministers. So wise men, not wise guys. So Paul's not trying to shame them or anything like that into giving. He's just trying to motivate them and encourage them. And I want to show you how he encourages them, because I think it will encourage you and I to make that move from where we are to being all in with Jesus, his church, and his mission, with our treasure as well as with our time and other things. So let's read this out loud together. This is verses 6 through 8, 2 Corinthians 9. A little bit of a longer verse. I hope you can see that. Let's read this out loud. Very important for all of us. Here we go. "Remember this: whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work." At all things and all times, having all that you need, being all in with Jesus, his church, and his mission. Remember this: whoever sows sparingly will reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will reap generously. When you give to the things of God, when you give to Christ, you give to his church, his mission, his work for his kingdom, you're not making really a contribution. You're making an investment. That's what he's talking about. You're not making a contribution, you're making an investment. In the same way that when a farmer takes out his money and he purchases seeds for his fields he's going to plant, he's making an investment. So he takes that seed and it leaves his hand, it disappears in the ground. He's not making a contribution to the ground, he's making an investment in the ground that will yield a harvest. And it really is a pretty simple metaphor. It's an agricultural metaphor, and maybe it's not as common to us, but it's such a simple metaphor that we all understand. Now I don't know a whole lot about farming. Everything I learned about farming, I learned from old MacDonald, because he had a farm, right? E-I-E-I-O. That's all I know. He had a farm. But you know this much. You always harvest what you plant. Always. You always harvest what you plant. If you plant corn, you don't harvest beans. If you plant apple trees, you don't harvest oranges. If you plant corn, you harvest corn. If you plant apple trees, you harvest apple trees. It's that way all the way across life. Everything that you do. Think of it in this way, because this is just as true. If you plant criticism, you'll harvest criticism. If you plant bitterness, you'll harvest bitterness. That would be exactly as true. If you plant gratitude, you'll harvest gratitude. If you plant thankfulness and positive things, you'll harvest in a positive way. If you give generously, you'll receive whatever it is that you need. Whatever you sow, you'll reap. Whatever you plant, you'll harvest. It's just a law. It's just a law. Here's the second law of this. You always harvest more than you plant. Always. You harvest more than you plant. So a farmer knows if he plants 7 pounds of corn, he's not going to get back a harvest of 7 pounds of corn, unless, of course, like the field gets nuked or something. I guess then it would glow. But if he plants 7 pounds of corn, he'll probably harvest 120 bushels of corn because it's multiplied. There's a multiplier effect in this. So whatever you plant, you always harvest much more than you plant. That's true of other things too. If you plant criticism, you're going to harvest more criticism. If you plant negativity, you're going to harvest more negativity than you even planted. Oh, but if you plant thankfulness, you're going to harvest more thankfulness than you planted. If you plant generously, your harvest will be generous. So you could ask yourself, and we could ask ourselves as a church, which harvest do we want? Do we want a small harvest or a modest harvest? Or do we want a generous one? Do we want to go big or go home? Or do we just want enough to get by and a little bit to get ahead? Or do we want to go all in with giving in a way that yields a greater harvest? Yeah, I know some people say, well, it's hard to do that. The reason we don't want to do that, the reason it's hard for us to be all in, especially when we talk about giving, is kind of something, the opposite of that law of the harvest. We say, well, when all my needs are met, when I've got everything else paid, when I have something extra, then I'll give to God someday. And that would be kind of like the weird thing of the farmer. Say if the farmer got down to his last bag of seed and the farmer said, I'm just going to keep this. Is that what he would do? He got down to his last bag and said, I got to keep this. I can't plant this one at all. Well, actuality in that metaphor would be the opposite, wouldn't it? If the farmer got down to his last bag of seed, he would have to say, I absolutely have to plant this one because I have to have a harvest. I have to have a harvest. Sometimes you have to plant when you feel like you don't have enough. You have to plant that seed when you feel like you don't have enough. Proverbs 11, it's a great proverb. It says, the world of the generous gets larger and larger. The world of the stingy gets smaller and smaller. One who blesses others is abundantly blessed. Those who help others are helped. By the way, it's not just about giving and generosity. All of life works this way. If you feel like you're not loved and you want to be loved, the first thing you do is give love to someone. You have to plant that. You have to invest that in someone. If you want to be happy, you have to make someone else happy. If you say, hey, I don't have any friends, it's not that you just sit around and wait for that to happen. It's that you go and make some friends. You go and be the friend that you wish you had. You harvest what you plant. You reap what you sow. The more you plant, the more you harvest. The more you sow, the more you reap. The more you give, the more you get. It's an investment, and it's a big reason for all-in giving, but it's not the only reason. Look at verse 7. Again, each of you should give what you have decided in your heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion. God loves a cheerful giver. I'll give you some rules real quick for this. We talk about giving and everything. The topic is always, how much are you going to give? People always talk about how much. Here's a pledge card from somewhere. I want you to look at this. Take a look at that pledge card. Notice every pledge card you ever see is laid out just like this in the amount we commit to give. So it starts out at $25. Right? And then it goes all the way up. And the one where you can fill in your own is at the top or at the bottom? It's at the top, isn't it? So the expectation is you get all the way to 200. You give more than 200. Right? So that's the one. If you're going to give something other than those amounts, you give more than that. It's just expected. But it's interesting, in the Bible, God seems more concerned not with the amount that you give, but the way that you give and why that you give. And I think the reason for that is if you give for the right reason and you give in the right way, you are going to give the right amount that you ought to give because it's coming from a heart that's all in with Jesus. And so Paul teaches the church very simply, from the heart, give thoughtfully. Give thoughtfully. Each of you should give what you have decided. It's not to be careless. It's something that you decide on, something that you pray about. And a lot of people do give thoughtlessly and carelessly. You just kind of give. Sometimes it just ends up being a token gift because of that. I always remember Rebecca and I were at a fundraising banquet once, and we knew we were going to make a contribution, but we hadn't really thought about it, or at least I hadn't thought about it yet as far as what we're going to give. And it comes time to give, and they're doing that kind of thing. And she sort of mouthed to me, how much? How much? So we're sitting at a table with other people. How much? So whisper back. I don't know. What do you think? And so then we start doing these hand signs under the table. Under the table. So under the table, she goes. And I said, $2, that's fine. Two's good. And she said, no, 200, 300. I think we ended up giving 500. I don't know. It went a different way, but I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't thought about what I was going to give. I knew I was going to give, but I hadn't really thought about this and prayed about this up to this point. All in giving to Jesus is from the heart that you give thoughtfully. It's not a careless thing. We give willfully. Each of you should give what you decided. This great phrase, not reluctantly or under compulsion. The Greek word translated reluctantly simply means out of pain. Don't give out of pain. Right? Makes sense, right? Something that you're going to do that you know is going to cause you pain, you hesitate in doing that, don't you? If it's some motion, if it's some movement, and you know that pain is going to follow, you hesitate doing that. He says, don't do that with giving. Don't do that with giving. If it causes you pain, probably the good news is that Jesus Christ is in the business of changing hearts so that you'll learn to give in a way where it doesn't cause you pain, but that it gives joy, that it provides you joy. Because that's what it's designed to do. He says, don't give under compulsion. God's not going to try to squeeze it out of you, but He will mold you and remake your heart so that from a heart that's all into Jesus, you'll give willfully of your treasure. And then the last one is a good one, cheerfully. For God loves a cheerful giver. So don't be reluctant. Don't let it be painful. Let it be cheerful. Let it be cheerful. The Greek word cheerful is the Greek word hilaros, from which we get the English word hilarious, right? You know that. Things are hilarious, and we use that as kind of a makes you laugh out loud. For instance, a couple of weeks ago, I got my hair cut. Thanks for noticing. I got my hair cut. Thanks for noticing. It usually takes my wife 3 or 4 days. But I told someone that I had a 30-minute appointment to get my hair cut, and they laughed out loud. Why is that funny, right? 30 minutes. Yeah, they said, that's a lifetime appointment for you, pal. Take a look in the mirror. You just need 30 seconds. We think of it as laughing out loud, and it could mean that, but the more definite Greek meaning of that word is cheerful, joyful, and you're going to love this word, satisfied. Satisfied. God loves a cheerful giver. God loves a giver that is satisfied, because giving joyfully, giving thoughtfully, giving willfully is a satisfying thing in the heart of one who follows Jesus, because you know that represents His heart in the way that He wants you to be. Giving thoughtfully, giving willfully, and giving with cheer and great joy, because your heart is all in with Jesus and His church and His mission. But you'll never get there if you don't see this. God is able to bless you, verse 8, bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need. All things, all times, all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Here's how this works. We call this the results of giving. There's kind of a mixed results of giving, because here's what happens when you give. Number one, God's care comes around. When you give, God's care comes around to you. God loves you. God calls you to be His child. He will take responsibility for you. He will take care of you. And the Bible teaches that He will meet all of your needs. And you'll learn this when you give to God. You'll learn that He'll take care of you in every season of your life. Sometimes God will take care of you and you will see it coming. Other times God will take care of you and you won't see it coming. You won't know how it's going to get there. You'll just know that He'll take care of you, and you'll experience that. And that's hard for us sometimes. That's number two. Your fear goes around, because that's what we worry about. Sometimes we say, if I really am all in and giving to God, maybe there won't be enough for me. I'm afraid there won't be enough for me. Some of you may do this. I could ask you this question. How many of you worry about retirement? How many of you worry about retirement? And then I could ask this question. How many of you are retired and you're too broke to think about things like that, to worry about that? Yeah, it's that way. Fear can paralyze us. And God says to us over and over, to those who follow Jesus, that one of the dominant things, don't be afraid. Don't worry. Can worry help you in any way? And Jesus said, no, it can't add a single hour to your life. But fear will take away from your life. Fear will take away. And you won't live in the joy and contentment You'll fear going all in with Jesus. You'll fear giving your treasure as well as your heart. But hear God's clear voice in this. He says, when you live the life I call you to live, a life that's all in with Jesus and His church and His mission, you can trust that He will take care of you. That's number 3. Your trust will come around. But you've got to step out in faith and plant that seed. Now, it helps you remember how He's taken care of you in the past. Some of you can remember back to times when God met needs of yours. Maybe He met one just in time, or maybe you were in a good season, a financially blessed season, and He had given you the resources to take care of things that you needed. Either way, it builds that trust that He'll take care of you. I love Francis Chan, and I love this great quote. He said this. I put it on it's on your outline as well. He said, "But God doesn't call us to be comfortable. He calls us to trust Him so completely that we are unafraid to put ourselves in situations where we will be in trouble if God doesn't come through." Here's the thing you can count on. Here's the thing you can trust. God will always come true. Sometimes you'll see it coming and you'll see where it's coming from. Other times it'll catch you by surprise and it'll be at the last possible moment. But every time, God will come through. Here's the last thing. Let's talk about a route to getting there. I love our photos of this, our all-in photos where he shows the kid there up on the diving board, because all of us have been in those situations, haven't we? We've been on the diving board. We've been wondering, am I going to have the courage to jump off this thing, or am I going to go back down the ladder? And sometimes it's true, isn't it? You just can't bring yourself to jump, especially if it's in the deep end. Sometimes you've been in situations you can't do that. Let me ask you this question. Some of you will know what I'm talking about. How many of you, when you go to get into a literal swimming pool, how many of you just jump right in? How many of you, by show of hands, you just jump in? Okay, even if it's the deep end. Okay, some of you just jump in. Yeah, we got some good pictures of that. Show the pictures of folks jumping in. That's a good one. Show the next one. This is my favorite one. There's a man who's jumping in. That brother is all in right there. Okay, so how many of you are more like me? You just wade in. You go step by step and you wade in and you feel that cold water coming up to sensitive areas of your body. Have you had that experience? Okay, you wade in. That's good. Okay, how many of you go, I don't do either one, I just push somebody else in? That would be you. Yeah, my people there, you push somebody else in. Well, we're not gonna push you in, but I am gonna give you some steps to wade in to all in giving this morning. Very quickly, some steps to wade in, because every one of us can take one of these steps depending on where you are. So here we go. Put these on your outline as well. Number 1, become a first-time giver. Become a first-time giver. If you've not given before, you don't have this practice, that's all right. Become a first-time giver. You say, oh, so sad, so sad. The offering baskets have already gone by. Never fear. There's an envelope in the seat pocket in front of you that you could take out and give. Or you could go to fbcelgin.com and click give right from where you are and begin that. You have to start. You have to start somewhere, all in, jumping in, wading in. You got to start with that first step. Become a first-time giver. Number 2, become a regular giver. There's a lot of folks who've given to things that excite you, and I understand this. Some of you every year are with us on our 2 pennies challenge. You gave to the cassava mill because that's the craziest, most exciting thing in the world that we're going to be partners in ministry like that. And so you say, I'll give to something that's exciting that comes up like that, and that's great, and that's a good way to start. But now take that next step. 1 Corinthians 16, verse 2. Listen to what Paul teaches the church, all of us. He said, on the first day of every week, on Sunday, each of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with his income. Regular giving on the first day of each week, or on the month, or however it is that you receive income, whatever it is, become a regular giver. Here's the next step toward being all in, become a tither. Become a tither. Boy, it's controversial, isn't it? Tithe means 10%. It goes back to the Old Testament, what God required of the people of Israel. We'll go all the way back to Malachi chapter 3, the old prophet there. And the prophet would talk to them about giving, and God asked them to give 10%. It actually reminded them that all of it belongs to God and that God gave them all of it. And the real reversal is God gives you all of it, but He's going to let you keep 90% of it and do with it what you want. Take care of your needs, buy stuff that you want, pay your bills, all that. He just asks that you give 10% back. And God issues a challenge. Malachi chapter 3, verse 10. God actually gives a challenge to them to test Him in that. And people have done that. There's a great church, show the church. This is Woodlands Church in Houston. It's like 30,000 people. Kerry Shook, famous Southern Baptist church. He did this. He told them, hey, if you try tithing for 3 months, okay, everybody ask you, challenge you, try it for 3 months. He said, if you're not blessed in amazing and abundant ways and you're not satisfied that God's even meeting your needs more, he said the church will refund all of your money. that you gave. That's pretty good, isn't it? I'm going to give you the same challenge. You try it. Whoever you would do it. You say, I've never done it before. I'm going to try tithing. If you try it for 3 months, 3 months, and then if you can come back and honestly say that God hasn't blessed you above and beyond what else you were doing, then Woodlands Church will give you all your money back. That's what we'll... Is that fair? I'll give you the pastor's number. I'm sure he wouldn't mind that. Put your heart, your treasure and your heart are going to go together, so we'll try that, to try and tithe. Here's fourth. There's more. See, it doesn't end there. Become an extravagant giver. Become an extravagant giver. Some of you give 10% to the church, and then you give to other things. You give to World Vision and Compassion and Fox Valley Christian Action, Administered Justice, Wayside, Refuge for Women. We get all kinds of things. Our church as a whole, we try to do this. We do this every year, and some of you love it. Some of you are maybe still not sure about it. We do our budget surplus giving. If God blesses us with excess income in a budget year, we take some of that and we give it away to God's wider kingdom work in our community, because that's extravagant giving. And I would say to you that that's where the real joy of giving begins. Something happens when you get to that point. Something happens. Something happens. Here's the last one. Become a sacrificial giver. When you intentionally give up something that you want or that you have, you give up something significant that's meaningful to you. You give it up for something else. A greater investment in God's kingdom and His work. A greater blessing which will reap a greater harvest. Now, some of you began in small ways with that. Some of you have practiced this a little bit. We've practiced this a little bit as a church in our 2 pennies challenges, where we ask you to give up something specific to something specific. And how much, I think of this every time we do it, how much would you have to give up for it to be a sacrifice? For it to really be a sacrifice that would hurt. For some of us, it would have to be a lot. But then again, all in is a lot. It's kind of like everything. When Jesus said, if you would follow me and be my disciple, you'd have to deny yourself and take up your cross. That was everything. You were all in with when you took up a cross, you were all in with your life at that point. Everything you had and everything you were. And follow Him. And listen, I think it's true for me. Maybe it's true for some of you too. So much of what I think of as a sacrifice, it really is something I could live without. I've got some friends who are into monastic spirituality, like monasteries and monks and that kind of thing. And one of them told me that the first time he went away to a retreat at a monastery, never done that before. So he goes to a monastery in this retreat, and the monk, gets him checked into his room. And then the monk is kind of like the hotel bellman. And he said, the monk said this to him. The monk said, hey, here's your key. And if you need anything else, just let me know, and I'll show you how to live without it. And that made some sense to me. What would you have to live without to be a sacrificial giver? To be all in with Jesus and all in with His church and all in with His mission. I know that's jumping off the high dive, and maybe you're not sure about that yet. But no matter who you are, every one of us can start wading into the pool one step at a time. One step at a time. If you say, I can't push all the chips on the table yet, but you got to start somewhere. Become a first-time giver. Become a regular giver and tither. Begin to be an extravagant giver where the joy begins, and all the way to a sacrificial giver. One step at a time, and before you know it, you are all in, and you get all in, and you get a big surprise because it turns out the water's actually warm. It's not cold like you expected, because God's always been all in for you. And Jesus' call is for you to go all in with Him. And you can't be all in if you're holding something out. You see, here's the truth. If Jesus doesn't have your money, He probably doesn't have your heart. If He doesn't have our money, if He doesn't have my money, He probably doesn't have my heart. So jump in or wade in. Just make sure that you get all in with Jesus Christ, His church, His mission, His kingdom.